Reinhard Heydrich died in June 1942, but the shadow he cast did not. He was one of the most feared men in the Third Reich, the architect of the final solution, the man they called the hangman. When a British-trained team killed him in Prague, Hitler promised the world would never forget his name. But Heydrich left something behind: a widow, 4 children, and a legacy none of them could escape. When Nazi Germany collapsed in 1945, the Heydrich family lost everything: their estate, their protection, their place in Hitler's world. What followed were years of interrogations, legal battles, and a life lived under a name many wished to forget. This is the fate of Reinhard Heydrich's children after Nazi Germany fell. To understand what happened to the children, you have to understand who their father was. Reinhard Heydrich wasn't just another Nazi officer. He was different, more calculating, more ruthless, more feared. By 1942, he held more power than almost anyone in the Third Reich, except Hitler and Himmler. He was chief of the Reich Security Main Office, the RSHA. That office controlled the Gestapo, the criminal police, and the intelligence service. It ran the concentration camps. It organized the deportations. It planned the final solution. Heydrich chaired the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where Nazi officials coordinated the systematic murder of Europe's Jews. He didn't just follow orders, he gave them. The Czechs called him the Butcher of Prague. The British called him the Hangman. Even Hitler called him the Man with the Iron Heart. Heydrich met Lena von Osten in late 1930 at a rowing club in Kiel. The connection was immediate, but it came at a cost. In early 1931, Heydrich faced a naval inquiry. He had become engaged to Lena while still committed to another woman. Admiral Erich Raeder dismissed him from the Navy that April. His military career ended before it began. The dismissal pushed him toward a new path. Encouraged by Lena's political beliefs and her early ties to the Nazi movement, he joined the Nazi Party. A couple of weeks later, he joined the SS. Their marriage in December 1931 marked the beginning of a partnership that would shape both his rise and the fate of the family he left behind. By 1942, the Heydrichs had 4 children: Klaus, Heider, Silke, and Marta. They lived on an estate at Jungfernbrescan in occupied Czechoslovakia. The property symbolized Heydrich's status in the SS hierarchy. Life at the estate continued with privilege and isolation. Lena hosted events for SS families. She maintained social ties within the Nazi elite. She remained loyal to her husband's vision and upheld the ideological world he had helped build. On May 27, 1942, everything changed. Heydrich was serving as acting Reichsprotector of Bohemia and Moravia, overseeing harsh security measures in Prague. That morning, he was traveling to his office in an open-top Mercedes. 2 Czech resistance agents, trained in Britain and parachuted into Czechoslovakia, were waiting for him. Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš had spent months preparing. Their mission was codenamed Operation Anthropoid. As Heydrich's car slowed at a hairpin turn, Gabčík stepped into the street and aimed his Sten gun. The weapon jammed, but Kubiš threw a modified anti-tank grenade. The blast ripped through the car. Heydrich survived the initial attack. He even got out of the car and tried to chase his attackers before collapsing. Shrapnel had torn into his body. Fragments from the car's upholstery, horsehair, leather, and spring wire had embedded in his wounds. He was rushed to a hospital. German doctors operated immediately, but infection set in. Despite massive doses of sulfonamides and the personal attention of Himmler's physician, his condition deteriorated rapidly. On June 4, 1942, 8 days after the attack, Reinhard Heydrich died. He was 38 years old. More than 1,300 people were killed in the immediate aftermath. The hunt for the resistance fighters turned into a campaign of terror. But Hitler also made a promise to Lena. He confirmed the family's right to the estate at Jungfernbrescan. He guaranteed financial support. He assured her that Germany would never forget Reinhard Heydrich's name. For the next 3 years, the Heydrich family lived in that protected bubble. Lena continued hosting SS families. The children grew up surrounded by officers who spoke of their father as a hero. Then came 1945. By early 1945, the war had turned catastrophic for Germany. Soviet forces were pushing west. American and British armies were crossing the Rhine. The Third Reich was collapsing. For families like the Heydrichs, deeply tied to the Nazi elite, the fall meant more than just defeat. It meant danger. The final months of the war brought rapid changes. With Soviet forces approaching Prague, Lena knew what was coming. The Red Army had a reputation, and the name Heydrich carried special weight in Czechoslovakia. In April 1945, Lena gathered the children and fled west toward Bavaria. They crossed into what would soon become the American occupation zone, joining thousands of other German refugees who had lost their homes. Klaus, Heider, Silke, and Marta left behind the only home they had known, the estate, the privileges, the protection. By the end of 1945, Lena and the children had settled temporarily in Aschau im Chiemgau, Bavaria. Their circumstances were far removed from the status they once held. They relied on small stipends, support from extended family, and temporary housing arranged by local authorities. The loss of property, income, and political protection marked the start of a new phase in their lives. But it wasn't just about money. The name Heydrich had become toxic. In Prague, Heydrich was remembered as the Butcher. In Czechoslovakia, his name meant terror, and his family carried that weight. For Lena, the post-war years would be defined by investigations, denazification hearings, and a struggle to rebuild an identity in a country that wanted to forget. For the children, it would be worse. They would spend the rest of their lives trying to answer a question none of them had asked. What does it mean to be the child of a monster? In the aftermath of the war, denazification became the central process shaping Lena's life. From 1946 onward, she faced a series of hearings in Bavaria designed to determine her political responsibility and eligibility for public benefits. The tribunals examined her early support for National Socialism, her marriage to a senior SS official, and the material advantages she had received during the Third Reich. Lena had joined the Nazi Party in 1931, well before Hitler's rise to power. She later described this as an act of idealism, claiming she had been swept up by enthusiasm for national renewal. Investigators noted that her early membership suggested conviction, not coercion. They also emphasized her close involvement in elite SS social circles, which gave her access to political networks and influence. Lena rejected this interpretation. She repeatedly insisted she had played no part in her husband's work. By 1949, Lena had been classified as a Mitläuferin, a follower rather than an active supporter. This status allowed her to avoid major penalties, but she still faced financial hardship. She had lost the family estate in Czechoslovakia and possessed no formal occupation. Throughout the late 1940s, she sought recognition as the widow of a German officer, which would entitle her to a pension under German law. Her case hinged on a technical question. Was Reinhard Heydrich, despite his SS rank, still considered a member of the German military at the time of his death? In 1954, a Munich court delivered a controversial decision that would define Lena's post-war life and fuel debates about justice and memory for decades. The judges ruled that Heydrich, as the chief of the Reich Security Main Office, had still held a qualifying status under military service regulations. This meant that Lena was entitled to a widow's pension. The decision sparked public outrage. Critics argued that a man widely known as one of the regime's most powerful and feared security officials should not be treated as a fallen soldier. Heydrich hadn't died on a battlefield. He died after overseeing the machinery of genocide. He died after chairing the Wannsee Conference. He died as the architect of the final solution. Yet the court's ruling rested on narrow legal criteria, not moral judgment. Under West German law, SS officers who also held military ranks could qualify for veteran benefits. Heydrich, technically, fit that category. Supporters of the ruling emphasized this point. The law was the law. The courts were bound by legislative definitions that made no room for moral considerations, but to many survivors, the ruling felt like a betrayal. The man who had built the camps, who had ordered the deportations, who had organized the murder of millions, his widow was now collecting a state pension. The ruling became a touchstone in broader discussions about post-war justice and memory. Some scholars question whether Lena's testimony, which portrayed her as a politically passive wife, influenced the outcome more than it should have. Others argue the courts simply followed the letter of the law, however uncomfortable that might be. Either way, the pension provided Lena with financial stability at a time when many former Nazi families were struggling to rebuild their lives. By the early 1950s, Lena Heydrich had completed the formal stages of denazification. She was legally permitted to work, travel, and receive state support. With her pension secured after the 1954 Munich ruling, she began rebuilding her life in a new direction. The family eventually settled on the island of Fehmarn, off the northern coast of West Germany. There, Lena opened a guest house called the Pension Imbria. It became both her livelihood and a hub for her social network. Running the pension brought Lena into contact with tourists, locals, and former acquaintances from her pre-1945 life. Several reports note that she maintained ties with families connected to the SS elite. Her loyalty to her husband and to the worldview they shared remained unmistakable. She often portrayed herself as a misunderstood victim of the post-war climate. In interviews, she emphasized the hardships she faced as a widow and mother, while downplaying or dismissing the broader consequences of the regime her husband served. In 1976, Lena published her memoir, Life with a War Criminal. The book drew immediate attention. Critics argued that it presented an incomplete and selective account of Reinhard Heydrich's role in the RSHA. They noted that Lena shifted blame away from her husband, questioned historical evidence, and emphasized his private qualities rather than his public actions. Historians still debate whether the memoir reflects genuine conviction, strategic self-presentation, or a mix of both. Public interest in Lena resurfaced in the 1970s and 1980s when journalists and researchers traveled to Fehmarn to interview her. One account, later cited in Crime Reads' feature, Interview with the Hangman's Wife, and based on journalist Nancy Doherty's recorded conversations with Lena, described her firm defense of Reinhard Heydrich and her belief that history had judged him unfairly. According to Doherty's interviews, Lena spoke with sharp recall and unwavering conviction, recounting details of her husband's life with precision. Observers noted that she showed little willingness to reinterpret the past. She never apologized. She never condemned the regime. She never acknowledged the suffering her husband had caused. By the early 1980s, Lena's health had begun to decline, though she remained active in her guest house as long as possible. Her final years on Fehmarn were relatively quiet, marked by visits from friends and occasional discussions with researchers. She died on August 14, 1985, at age 73. Her death closed a chapter that had spanned the rise of the Third Reich, its collapse, and 4 decades of post-war Germany. The eldest son, Klaus, did not live to see the end of the war. Tragedy struck the family in October 1943. Klaus died in a traffic accident near the estate when he collided with a delivery truck while riding his bicycle. He was just 11 years old. His death was a devastating blow to Lena, who mentioned it repeatedly in later interviews. Hitler sent condolences. SS figures attended the funeral. For the surviving children, Heider, Silke, and Marta, Klaus became a ghost, the brother who died before the fall, the one who never had to answer questions about their father. Reinhard Heydrich became the most publicly known of the surviving children. After the family fled to Bavaria in 1945, he completed his schooling in the region and later pursued a career as an engineer. For decades, Heider avoided public attention and declined interviews, choosing to keep his distance from discussions about his father's role in the war. In 2009, he made a rare exception. He agreed to speak with John Martin, the author of The Mirror Caught the Sun, Operation Anthropoid 1942. In that conversation, Heider adopted a notably defensive stance toward his father. He didn't deny what Reinhard Heydrich had done, but he framed it in terms of duty, orders, and the context of war. It was a careful position, not quite denial, not quite acceptance, just defense. In 2011, Heider briefly returned to public attention after he offered to support the restoration of the former family residence at Panenské Břežany in the Czech Republic. The proposal drew strong reactions. The property remains closely associated with his father's wartime administration. Local officials noted that Heider had left the estate as a child in 1945 and viewed his offer as an attempt to help preserve a historic site. But public response reflected a wider discomfort with any initiative linked to the Heydrich name. Some commentators argued that restoring the property with his involvement risked overlooking the suffering experienced under Nazi occupation. Others saw the gesture as a possible form of acknowledgement rather than tribute. But the controversy made one thing clear: Even 70 years later, the Heydrich name still carried weight. Reinhard Heydrich lived a quiet life. He worked as an engineer. He raised a family. He avoided the press. But he never fully distanced himself from his father's legacy, and he never apologized for it. Reliable information about Silke is scarce. One unconfirmed online report suggests she may have emigrated to the United States, but no verified sources support this. She appears in no public records. She gave no interviews. She left no trace. Of all the Heydrich children, Silke is the one who truly vanished. Whether by choice or circumstance, she became a ghost, not just to the public, but to history itself. Marte, who now goes by the name Bayer, still lives on Fechmarn, where she owns a small clothing shop. Like her brother, she does not give interviews. But unlike Heydrich, her silence comes from a different place. Marte was born in 1942, just months before her father died. She never knew him. She never heard his voice. She never saw him except in photographs.
In one remark published in the German magazine Stern, she noted that people cannot imagine what it is like to have such a father, and that his name follows her day and night.
She didn't choose her father. She didn't choose his crimes, but she carries his name anyway. Marta's son, Reinhard, named after his grandfather, has expressed the view that no one truly knows the full extent of what his grandfather did. It's a statement that reveals the family's continued ambiguity about the past. By contrast, Peter Thomas Heydrich, the son of Reinhard's brother Heinz, has stated publicly that he finds it unfortunate that Reinhard's children never distanced themselves from their father's actions or acknowledged, even symbolically, the suffering experienced under his authority. These differing views highlight the complexity of navigating the Heydrich legacy within the extended family. What is clear is that none of the surviving Heydrich children became involved in extremist politics or public advocacy related to the Third Reich. Their lives differed sharply from the public legacy embraced by their mother. While Lena defended Reinhard Heydrich until her death, the children chose paths that offered privacy and normalcy rather than public confrontation or ideological alignment.
But they also never fully confronted what their father had done. They never apologized. They never condemned. They simply lived.
And in that silence, they revealed something about the weight of inherited guilt. Today, more than 80 years after Reinhard Heydrich's death, his name still carries power. In Prague, there's a memorial at the site where he was attacked. In Lidice, there's a memorial to the village he destroyed. In Holocaust museums around the world, his photograph appears alongside Hitler and Himmler as one of the architects of genocide. But what about his children? What about the families left behind? The Heydrich children represent a broader question that Germany and the world still struggles with. What responsibility do the children of perpetrators carry? Some argue they carry none. They didn't choose their parents. They didn't commit the crimes. They were victims of circumstance. Others argue that silence is complicity, that refusing to condemn is in its own way a form of support, that the children had a moral obligation to distance themselves from their father's legacy. The truth, as always, is more complicated. The Heydrich children weren't alone. Across Germany, the children of Nazi leaders faced similar questions. Gudrun Burwitz, the daughter of Heinrich Himmler, spent her life defending her father and working with Stille Hilfe to support convicted war criminals. She never apologized. She never condemned. She died in 2018, still loyal to the ideology that had shaped her childhood. Niklas Frank, the son of Hans Frank, the Nazi governor of occupied Poland, took the opposite path. He spent his life condemning his father, writing books about his crimes, and speaking to students about the danger of inherited silence. Edda Göring, the daughter of Hermann Göring, defended her father but stayed out of politics. She lived quietly, rarely spoke publicly, and died in 2018. Rolf Mengele, the son of Josef Mengele, eventually confronted his father's crimes. He met with Holocaust survivors. He acknowledged the horror, but he also struggled with the weight of a name that meant death.
Each family chose a different path. Some defended, some condemned, some stayed silent.
The Heydrich children chose silence, not the silence of shame, not the silence of of guilt, just silence. They didn't become neo-Nazis. They didn't join far-right movements. They didn't publish memoirs defending their father, but they also didn't apologize. They didn't condemn. They didn't acknowledge the suffering their father caused. And in post-war Germany, that silence said everything. Today, the Heydrich name remains a warning, not just about what one man did, but about how families, communities, and nations choose to remember or forget their darkest chapters. The children of Reinhard Heydrich lived ordinary lives. They worked, they raised families, they tried to move on, but the shadow their father cast never faded, and it never will. Reinhard Heydrich died in 1942, but his legacy lived on, not just in history books, but in the lives of 4 children who never asked to carry his name. They chose silence, and that silence became its own answer. The question isn't just what happened to Heydrich's children, it's what we expect from them, and what their choices say about guilt, memory, and the weight of history. If you want to know what happened to other Nazi families, watch What Happened to Heinrich Himmler's Family After World War II next. Like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching.